What drives a man to risk everything for love? In 1855 Richmond, Virginia, while other enslaved people dreamed of their own freedom, Moses worked 16 hours a day with only one goal: buying the woman he loved before she disappeared forever. But when the auction block threatened to tear them apart, Moses discovered that some prices can't be paid in coins. This is the story of a love so fierce it shattered the economics of slavery itself. Subscribe to the channel and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The hammer fell at exactly 2:17 on a Tuesday afternoon, and Moses felt his heart shatter into 1,000 pieces. Standing in the crowd outside Lumpkin's slave jail in Richmond, Virginia, he watched the auctioneer's gavel seal the fate he had worked 3 years to prevent. Sarah, the woman whose laugh had kept him alive through beatings, whose whispered promises had sustained him through 18-hour workdays, had just been sold to a tobacco plantation in South Carolina for $850, $43 more than everything Moses had saved. Moses clutched the leather pouch in his coat pocket, feeling the weight of $807 in coins and crumpled bills. 3 years of brutal labor, of selling his dinner for pennies, of working extra shifts until his hands bled. 3 years of hope that had just died in 17 seconds of bidding. But as the crowd began to disperse and Sarah was led away in chains, something extraordinary happened. She turned back, caught his eye through the mass of buyers and sellers, and mouthed 3 words that would change everything: "Find another way." Most enslaved people in Richmond knew Moses as the quiet blacksmith who worked for Master Coleman at the ironworks near the James River. They saw a man who kept his head down, spoke little, and never caused trouble. What they didn't know was that Moses could read, write, and calculate numbers better than most white men in Virginia. His previous owner, a failed schoolteacher named Benjamin Wright, had taught him in secret before gambling debts forced him to sell Moses to pay his creditors. That education, hidden behind a mask of simplicity, had become Moses's greatest weapon in the impossible war he was about to wage. The moment Sarah disappeared around the corner, Moses began planning. He had 48 hours before she would be loaded onto a wagon train heading south. 48 hours to accomplish what no enslaved person in Virginia had ever attempted: buying back someone who had already been sold. The plan that formed in his mind was so audacious, so legally complex, that it would require him to deceive not just his master, but the entire slave-trading apparatus of Richmond. Moses was about to become something unprecedented: a slave lawyer fighting the auction block itself. Sarah Johnson had arrived at Master Coleman's plantation 2 years earlier, sold by a bankrupt farmer from North Carolina who needed quick cash to avoid losing his land. She was 23 years old, beautiful in a way that made slave masters take notice and enslaved women fear for her safety. But Sarah possessed something more dangerous than beauty: she was brilliant. Within weeks of arrival, she had reorganized the entire household, improved crop yields through better planning, and even negotiated better treatment for the field hands by proving to Coleman that well-fed workers produced more cotton. Moses fell in love not just with her face, but with her mind. Their courtship happened in stolen moments: conversations by the well after sunset, glances across the dining hall during the one meal they shared each day, letters passed through trusted friends, even though Sarah couldn't read them herself until Moses taught her during Sunday afternoons when they claimed to be praying. By winter of 1854, they were planning a future together, discussing the children they would raise and the freedom they would somehow find. But their happiness made them careless, and carelessness in slavery was often fatal. Master Coleman discovered their relationship in the worst possible way. He had intended to force Sarah into his bed, a privilege he felt entitled to as her owner. When Sarah refused, citing her commitment to Moses, Coleman's rage was volcanic. He couldn't punish Moses directly without losing his most skilled blacksmith, so he chose a crueler revenge. He would sell Sarah to the Deep South, where Moses would never see her again, and pocket a substantial profit in the process. The auction was scheduled for 3 weeks later, giving Moses just enough time to taste hope before having it torn away. Those 3 weeks became the most intense period of Moses's life. He worked 20-hour days, taking on every possible job that paid extra. He shod horses for travelers passing through Richmond, earning a few cents per animal. He repaired farm tools for neighboring plantations, splitting the payment with Master Coleman but keeping his portion. He even sold his Sunday rations to other slaves who had money but not enough food. Every penny went into the leather pouch he kept hidden beneath a loose floorboard in his cabin. But as the auction date approached, Moses realized that honest work would never generate enough money. He needed $800 to have any chance of outbidding serious buyers, and he had managed to save only $612. That's when Moses made a decision that would either secure Sarah's freedom or cost him his life. He decided to steal, but not in any way that could be traced. Moses began forging documents, using his secret literacy to create bills of sale that redirected payments for his blacksmith work directly to him, instead of Master Coleman. The forgery scheme worked perfectly for 2 weeks. Moses created fake orders for ironwork, complete with letterheads he copied from legitimate businesses. He would complete the real work, but deliver bills that sent payment to a post office box he had established under a false name in downtown Richmond. The extra money accumulated rapidly, bringing his total to $743 by the weekend before Sarah's auction. But he was still short, and time was running out. On the Sunday before the auction, Moses approached Sarah with a plan so desperate it bordered on insanity. He wanted her to convince Master Coleman to delay the sale for 1 week, claiming she was pregnant and needed medical examination to confirm the pregnancy's impact on her market value. It was a dangerous lie that could result in brutal punishment if discovered, but Sarah agreed without hesitation. She trusted Moses completely, even when his plan seemed impossible. The pregnancy ruse worked better than either of them expected. Master Coleman, hoping that a pregnant slave would fetch a higher price from buyers looking for future labor, agreed to postpone the auction until the doctor could examine Sarah and provide documentation of her condition. But the delay came with a price. Coleman increased Sarah's selling price from $800 to $900, reasoning that a pregnant woman represented a 2-for-1 investment. Moses now needed almost $100 more than he had originally calculated. That night, Moses made the most dangerous decision of his life. He decided to rob Master Coleman directly, but in a way that would never be discovered. Coleman kept a strongbox in his office containing payments from customers who bought iron goods on credit. Moses had observed the box's location during the dozens of times he had been summoned to report on work orders. More importantly, he had watched Coleman open it and knew the combination. The year Coleman's father had died, 1823. Breaking into Coleman's office required Moses to overcome not just locks and guards, but his own moral reservations about theft. He had never stolen anything more valuable than extra food, and the idea of taking money felt like crossing a line he could never uncross. But as he lay awake that Sunday night, listening to Sarah's quiet breathing from her cabin 50 yards away, Moses realized that some lines were meant to be crossed. Love demanded courage, and courage sometimes required crime. Monday night, Moses executed his plan with surgical precision. He waited until 2 a.m., when even the night watchman was dozing, then slipped out of his cabin and made his way to the main house. Coleman's office was on the ground floor, accessible through a window that Moses had deliberately left unlatched the previous afternoon while delivering a repaired door hinge. The strongbox sat exactly where he remembered, containing $137 in various bills and coins. Moses took exactly $96, leaving enough money that Coleman wouldn't immediately notice the theft. With $939 in his possession, Moses felt confident for the first time in weeks. He had enough money to outbid any reasonable buyer, plus a small cushion for unexpected complications. But Tuesday morning brought news that crushed his optimism like a hammer blow. Master Coleman announced that he had received an advance offer of $850 from a tobacco plantation in South Carolina, and he was inclined to accept it rather than risk the uncertainty of public auction. The sale would happen that afternoon, and Moses wouldn't even have a chance to bid. Standing outside Lumpkin's slave jail that Tuesday afternoon, Moses watched his carefully laid plans crumble as the auctioneer accepted the South Carolina plantation's offer without opening the sale to public bidding. Sarah was sold in a private transaction that excluded every other potential buyer, including the one person who had sacrificed everything to save her. But as Moses felt despair threatening to overwhelm him, Sarah's eyes found his across the crowd, and her lips formed those three words that rekindled hope in his heart: "Find another way." Moses didn't know what Sarah meant, but he knew she was telling him not to give up. As she was led away in chains, heading for a holding cell where she would spend the night before beginning the journey to South Carolina, Moses began formulating a new plan. He couldn't outbid the plantation that had bought her, but perhaps he could buy her from them. It would require traveling to South Carolina, negotiating with strangers, and risking capture as a runaway slave. But Moses had come too far to surrender now. What Moses didn't know was that Sarah had already set her own desperate plan in motion, and in less than 12 hours, everything would change again. That night, as Moses lay sleepless on his straw mattress clutching his leather pouch of useless money, Sarah was executing the most dangerous gamble of her life. Inside the holding cell at Lumpkin's slave jail, she had convinced the guard to let her write a letter to her new master, claiming she needed to inform him of a medical condition that might affect her work capacity. What she actually wrote would either save her or get her killed before dawn. The letter, addressed to Mr. Henry Caldwell of Magnolia Plantation in Charleston, contained information that made Sarah infinitely more valuable than any cotton picker. She revealed that she could read, write, keep detailed financial records, and manage complex household operations. More crucially, she claimed to have discovered evidence of embezzlement at Master Coleman's plantation that could save Caldwell thousands of dollars if he knew how to use it. But the letter came with a condition that no slave had ever dared make. She would only share this information if Caldwell agreed to let her purchase her own freedom through labor contracts. Moses knew nothing of Sarah's letter when he made his own desperate decision the next morning. Unable to sleep, tormented by the image of Sarah disappearing forever, he decided to do something that could result in his immediate execution. He was going to run away to Charleston, find the plantation that had bought her, and offer his own skills as payment for her freedom. It was suicide disguised as rescue, but Moses had reached the point where living without Sarah felt worse than dying for her. The irony was devastating. At the exact moment Moses was preparing to sacrifice his own freedom for love, Sarah was in a wagon heading south, clutching a response letter that would change both their lives. Mr. Caldwell had written back within hours, intrigued by her claims and impressed by her literacy. He agreed to her proposal but added a twist that Sarah hadn't anticipated. If she could prove her value by increasing his plantation's profits, he would allow her to purchase not just her own freedom, but that of one other person of her choosing. Sarah knew exactly who that person would be. Moses discovered Sarah's plan in the most unexpected way possible. On Wednesday evening, as he was stealing supplies for his planned escape to Charleston, Master Coleman burst into the slave quarters with news that sent shockwaves through the entire plantation. He had received a letter from Mr. Caldwell inquiring about purchasing the blacksmith Moses as a companion worker for Sarah, who had proven so valuable in her first day that Caldwell wanted to acquire her entire former household team. The letter revealed Sarah's strategy in full. She had convinced Caldwell that Moses was essential to her ability to manage complex operations, claiming they had worked as a team for years, and that separating them would diminish her effectiveness. It was a brilliant manipulation that played on Caldwell's greed while creating a legitimate path for reuniting them. But the plan came with a price that made Moses's heart sink. Caldwell was offering only $400 for Moses, exactly half of what Sarah had cost, and Master Coleman was demanding $600. For 48 hours, Moses's fate hung in the balance as Coleman and Caldwell negotiated through a series of increasingly tense letters. Coleman suspected that Sarah and Moses meant more to each other than simple work partners, and he was determined to extract maximum profit from their connection. Meanwhile, Sarah was working frantically at Magnolia Plantation, proving her worth by reorganizing Caldwell's chaotic record-keeping system and discovering that his previous bookkeeper had indeed been stealing money for months. Sarah's discovery of the embezzlement gave her unexpected leverage. The stolen money totaled over $800, and Sarah's detailed documentation provided Caldwell with legal grounds to recover the funds. Grateful and impressed, Caldwell agreed to increase his offer for Moses to $550, but Coleman still refused to budge from his $600 demand. The negotiation seemed deadlocked until Sarah made an offer that stunned everyone involved. She proposed to pay the $50 difference herself, using money she would earn through additional work beyond her normal duties. It was an unprecedented arrangement, a slave offering to pay for another slave's purchase. But Caldwell was so impressed by Sarah's initiative that he agreed to advance her the money against future earnings. For the first time in American history, an enslaved woman was effectively buying an enslaved man, using her own labor as collateral. Moses learned of the final agreement on Friday morning when Master Coleman summoned him to the main house with news that left him speechless. He had been sold to Magnolia Plantation for $550, with the unusual provision that $50 of the purchase price would be paid through Sarah's additional labor over the coming year. Coleman seemed pleased to have extracted maximum profit from what he still didn't fully understand was a love story disguised as a business transaction. The journey to Charleston took 3 days, during which Moses experienced emotions he had never thought possible. He was traveling deeper into slavery, farther from any chance of northern freedom, yet he felt more hopeful than he had in years. Every mile southward brought him closer to Sarah, and the knowledge that she had orchestrated their reunion filled him with pride and amazement. The woman he loved had outmaneuvered the entire slave trading system using nothing but intelligence and courage. Moses arrived at Magnolia Plantation on a humid Tuesday morning in late October 1855, and the first person he saw was Sarah, standing on the front porch of the main house wearing a clean dress and holding a ledger book. For a moment, they could only stare at each other across the dusty courtyard, both hardly believing that their desperate plans had actually succeeded. Then Sarah smiled, and Moses felt his heart restart after days of holding his breath. Their reunion was necessarily brief and public, observed by Mr. Caldwell and several other white employees who were curious about the unusual circumstances of Moses's purchase. But that evening, when the workday ended, and they were finally alone by the well behind the slave quarters, Sarah explained the full scope of what she had accomplished. She hadn't just arranged Moses's purchase. She had negotiated a path to freedom for both of them. The arrangement Sarah had made with Caldwell was complex but achievable. She would serve as his chief household manager and bookkeeper, while Moses would oversee all metalworking and mechanical repairs on the plantation. In exchange for exceptional performance, they would be allowed to earn money through additional work for neighboring plantations during their free time. After 5 years of this arrangement, they would have earned enough to purchase their own freedom at predetermined prices: $800 for Sarah, $600 for Moses. But Sarah had hidden an even more ambitious plan within their labor contract. She had convinced Caldwell to include a clause allowing them to marry and live together in a separate cabin, arguing that married couples were more stable and productive workers. What Caldwell didn't know was that Sarah had been researching South Carolina law and had discovered a legal loophole that could accelerate their path to freedom dramatically. Under South Carolina law, enslaved people who could prove exceptional skill in essential trades could petition for licensed independence, a status that allowed them to work independently while paying a percentage of their earnings to their master. It was rarely granted, but Sarah believed their combined skills in bookkeeping and metalworking gave them a legitimate case. If successful, they could earn freedom money much faster than through their current arrangement. Moses was overwhelmed by the sophistication of Sarah's planning. While he had been focused on accumulating money for a single purchase, she had been studying legal systems and negotiating complex contracts. Her strategic thinking had not only reunited them, but created a realistic pathway to something that had seemed impossible: legal freedom for both of them, earned through their own efforts rather than granted by white charity. Their first weeks at Magnolia Plantation established a routine that balanced hope with hard work. Moses spent his days repairing farm equipment, shoeing horses, and crafting iron tools that saved Caldwell significant money on outside purchases. Sarah managed the household accounts, supervised food preparation for field workers, and maintained records that revealed inefficiencies worth hundreds of dollars annually. Both of them worked additional hours for neighboring plantations, slowly accumulating the money that would eventually purchase their freedom. But their happiness was fragile, dependent on Caldwell's continued satisfaction with their work and his willingness to honor agreements that had no legal backing. Moses and Sarah both knew that their master could change his mind at any moment, sell them separately, or simply refuse to acknowledge their freedom payments when the time came. Every day required them to prove their worth while hiding the depth of their love and ambition. The first serious test of their arrangement came in December 1855, when a neighboring plantation owner offered Caldwell $900 for Sarah, claiming he needed a literate woman to manage his struggling household. It was significantly more than Caldwell had paid for her, and Moses watched in terror as his master considered the offer for 3 agonizing days. Sarah remained calm throughout the crisis, quietly demonstrating her value by identifying another case of employee theft that saved Caldwell over $200. Caldwell ultimately refused the offer, but his hesitation revealed how precarious their situation remained. That night, as Moses and Sarah held each other in their small cabin, they made a pact that would define their remaining years in bondage. They would not just work toward freedom, they would make themselves so indispensable that selling them would cost Caldwell more than keeping them. It was a dangerous strategy that required them to excel without threatening white authority, but it was their best chance for survival. Sarah's next move would test that strategy in ways neither of them expected, and it would reveal a secret that could either guarantee their freedom or destroy everything they had built. The secret Sarah had been hiding came to light on a cold January morning in 1856, when she collapsed during breakfast preparation and couldn't stop vomiting. Moses found her behind the kitchen, pale and shaking, trying to clean herself before anyone noticed. In that moment, looking into her frightened eyes, he understood what she had been too terrified to tell him. Sarah was pregnant, and in the brutal mathematics of slavery, that changed everything. Pregnancy for an enslaved woman was simultaneously blessing and curse. The child would belong to Caldwell, adding to his human property while potentially providing Sarah with protection. Masters rarely sold pregnant women who might miscarry from travel stress. But pregnancy also made Sarah vulnerable in new ways. If Caldwell suspected the father was Moses, he might separate them to prevent the formation of a family unit that could challenge his authority. If the pregnancy affected Sarah's work performance, he might decide she was no longer worth the special arrangements they had negotiated. Sarah had known about the pregnancy for 6 weeks but had hidden it, hoping she could continue working at full capacity until her freedom payments were complete. Now, watching Moses process the news, she saw fear replace joy in his expression. They both understood that their carefully constructed plan for freedom had just become infinitely more complicated. A baby would make escape impossible and legal freedom much more expensive. since they would need to purchase 3 people instead of 2. Moses spent that entire day wrestling with emotions he had never experienced. Joy at the thought of becoming a father mixed with terror at what fatherhood meant in bondage. Their child would be born into slavery, owned by another man, subject to sale or punishment based on Caldwell's whims. The baby would grow up knowing that its parents belonged to someone else, that love existed only at their master's discretion. Yet beneath the fear, Moses felt something unexpected, determination stronger than any he had known. Sarah's pregnancy remained secret for 2 more weeks, during which time she pushed herself to maintain her usual productivity, despite constant nausea and exhaustion. Moses worked extra hours to cover for her when she needed rest, taking on additional blacksmith projects that kept him busy until midnight most nights. They were buying time, hoping to find a solution before Caldwell discovered the pregnancy and potentially disrupted their freedom arrangements. The solution came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Margaret Caldwell, the master's wife, had been struggling with her own pregnancy complications and had grown to rely on Sarah's household management skills. When she noticed Sarah's symptoms, instead of reporting them to her husband, she approached Sarah privately with a proposition that stunned both Moses and Sarah. Mrs. Caldwell wanted Sarah to serve as her personal midwife and nursery manager, a position that would provide protection during pregnancy and potentially faster earnings toward freedom. Mrs. Caldwell's offer revealed fractures in the Caldwell household that Sarah had observed but never dared exploit. Margaret Caldwell resented her husband's harsh treatment of the enslaved workers and had quietly been undermining his authority through small acts of kindness and protection. She saw Sarah's pregnancy as an opportunity to secure loyal help for her own childbearing, while simultaneously protecting an enslaved woman she had grown to respect and depend upon. The arrangement Mrs. Caldwell proposed was extraordinary in its scope. Sarah would receive additional payment for midwifery services, not just for the Caldwell family, but for other plantation families in the area who needed skilled birth assistance. The money would go directly towards Sarah's Freedom Fund, potentially reducing her required service time from 5 years to 3. In exchange, Sarah would provide complete discretion about Mrs. Caldwell's private opinions regarding slavery and her efforts to mitigate its harshest aspects. Moses initially distrusted Mrs. Caldwell's motives, suspecting a trap designed to extract information about their escape plans or freedom arrangements. But Sarah recognized something authentic in the white woman's desperation to find an ally within her own household. Margaret Caldwell was trapped in a different kind of bondage, married to a man whose cruelty she despised, but powerless to directly challenge his authority. Their alliance would be based on mutual need rather than sentiment. The partnership between Sarah and Mrs. Caldwell began immediately and proved beneficial beyond either woman's expectations. Sarah's midwifery skills, learned from her grandmother in North Carolina, were exceptional, and word of her abilities spread quickly among the plantation wives of Charleston County. Within months, she was earning substantial fees for attending births throughout the region, money that accumulated rapidly toward her freedom price, while also providing valuable intelligence about the local slave-owning community. Moses benefited indirectly from Sarah's new position through the connections she made with plantation families who needed metalworking services. Sarah would mention Moses's skills during her visits, leading to contracts for wrought iron gates, horseshoes, and farming equipment that provided steady income beyond his work for Caldwell. Their combined earnings began exceeding their most optimistic projections, making freedom seem achievable within 3 years rather than 5. But success brought new dangers. Other enslaved people on the plantation began to resent Moses and Sarah's special treatment and higher earnings. Jealousy created tensions that threatened to expose their freedom plans if disgruntled workers reported their activities to Caldwell. Moses and Sarah had to navigate the delicate politics of slave quarter life, while maintaining the secrecy essential to their survival, sharing enough of their good fortune to avoid resentment while protecting the full scope of their ambitions. The most serious threat came from James, an enslaved driver who had hoped to become Caldwell's chief overseer and saw Moses's rising status as competition for the master's favor. James began documenting Moses's activities, noting the money he earned from outside work and the frequency of his private conversations with Sarah. Worse, James suspected that Moses could read and write, abilities that would terrify white authorities if proven. Literacy among enslaved people was illegal in South Carolina, punishable by severe whipping or sale to the Deep South. Sarah discovered James's surveillance through her network of connections among the plantation women, who overheard conversations between James and the field overseers. The revelation forced Moses and Sarah to make an agonizing decision. They could report James's activities to Mrs. Caldwell, potentially getting him punished or sold, or they could try to buy his silence through sharing some of their earnings. Either choice carried enormous risks and moral complications that tested their principles as much as their survival instincts. They chose a third option that revealed the depth of their strategic thinking. Rather than confronting James directly or reporting him to the authorities, they decided to make him an ally by offering him something he wanted more than their destruction. Moses approached James with a proposal to include him in their outside work arrangements, splitting profits from jobs that required both skilled metalwork and labor supervision. It was a calculated gamble that converted a dangerous enemy into a reluctant partner. The alliance with James proved crucial when Sarah went into labor during the summer of 1856. The birth was difficult, requiring assistance that Moses couldn't provide without risking exposure of their relationship's depth. James helped maintain the fiction that Moses was simply concerned about a fellow worker's welfare, while secretly ensuring that Sarah received the care she needed. Their son, born healthy after 12 hours of labor, became the unwitting beneficiary of a conspiracy that included former enemies united by shared risk. They named the baby Frederick, after Frederick Douglass, whose autobiography Sarah had read in secret using skills Moses had taught her. The choice of name was both tribute and promise, a declaration that their son would grow up free, no matter what sacrifices that freedom required. But naming him also meant acknowledging that every day of his early life would be spent in bondage, owned by a man who could separate him from his parents at any moment. Caldwell's reaction to Frederick's birth tested every assumption Moses and Sarah had made about their master's character. Rather than viewing the baby as valuable property, Caldwell seemed annoyed by the disruption to Sarah's work schedule and the additional mouth to feed. His indifference was actually protective. He showed no interest in claiming Frederick as a future field hand or household servant, treating him as an inconvenience rather than an asset. This neglect provided Moses and Sarah with unexpected freedom to raise their son according to their own values. The months following Frederick's birth became the most productive period of Moses and Sarah's enslavement. Sarah returned to midwifery work within weeks, carrying Frederick with her to birthing calls and demonstrating maternal skills that increased her reputation among plantation families. Moses expanded his metalworking business to include decorative ironwork for Charleston homes, earning premium prices for artistic skills that few blacksmiths possessed. Their combined income reached levels that made freedom payments accelerate dramatically. By December 1856, just over a year after Moses's arrival at Magnolia Plantation, they had accumulated nearly $600 toward their freedom fund. Sarah's $800 price seemed achievable within 2 years, while Moses's $600 cost could be met even sooner. More importantly, they had established themselves as indispensable to the plantation's operations and the broader community's needs, making their sale to other masters increasingly unlikely. But their growing success attracted attention from sources they hadn't anticipated. Charleston city authorities, concerned about reports of enslaved people earning substantial independent income, began investigating the legal status of Sarah and Moses's work arrangements. South Carolina law restricted enslaved people's ability to conduct independent business, and their activities were pushing the boundaries of what white authorities would tolerate, even when profitable for their masters. The investigation reached Caldwell in early 1857, when a city marshal arrived at Magnolia Plantation with questions about Moses and Sarah's outside work. Caldwell was forced to choose between protecting arrangements that benefited him financially and avoiding legal complications that could result in fines or restrictions on his property. For 3 terrifying days, Moses and Sarah waited to learn whether their master would defend them or sacrifice them to avoid official scrutiny. Caldwell's decision revealed the complex calculations that governed slavery's economics. He chose to protect Moses and Sarah, but only after restructuring their arrangements to comply more clearly with South Carolina law. All outside work would now be formally contracted through Caldwell himself, with him taking a larger percentage of earnings while providing legal cover for their activities. It was a setback that increased their required service time but preserved their path to freedom. The new arrangements also included provisions that addressed Frederick's status in ways that filled Moses and Sarah with both hope and dread. Caldwell agreed to include Frederick in their freedom purchase calculations, setting his price at $400 to be paid when he reached age 10. It was the first time their son's freedom had been given a specific price, making it real rather than hypothetical. But it also meant they would need to earn an additional $400 beyond their own freedom costs, extending their bondage by at least another year. As 1857 progressed, Moses and Sarah adapted to their new circumstances while secretly planning for contingencies that Caldwell couldn't control. They began teaching Frederick to read using techniques that appeared to be simple games, ensuring that their son would possess the same literacy skills that had enabled their own survival and advancement. They also started building connections with free black communities in Charleston, establishing relationships that could provide support if they achieved legal freedom. Their most ambitious preparation involved documenting every aspect of their freedom agreements in written contracts that Mrs. Caldwell helped them prepare in secret. These documents, while not legally binding, created evidence of Caldwell's promises that could be used to hold him accountable if he attempted to renege on their arrangements. Sarah's legal research had revealed that South Carolina courts occasionally enforced verbal agreements between masters and slaves when sufficient documentation existed. By the spring of 1858, Moses and Sarah had achieved something unprecedented in the American South. They had transformed their enslavement into a form of indentured servitude, with clearly defined terms and achievable endpoints. Their love had not just survived the auction block. It had defeated the economic logic of slavery itself, proving that human determination could overcome even the most oppressive systems when guided by intelligence, patience, and unwavering commitment to each other. But their greatest test was still coming, and it would require them to risk everything they had built for a chance at something even more precious than their own freedom. If this story moved you, subscribe to our channel and share it with someone who needs to hear how love can triumph over the impossible. Stories like Moses and Sarah's remind us that even in humanity's darkest moments, hope and determination can light the way to freedom.